All right, welcome everyone to the Diversity and Inclusion in Sport discussion series powered by the Calgary Flames Foundation. My name is Andrea Carey. I will do a little bit more of an introduction in just a moment, but wanted to begin today by recognizing the territories that I'm coming to you from today, which are those of the Coast Salish people here in Victoria, where I've been grateful to be an uninvited settler on the nations of the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Wasanish peoples, and looking forward this weekend to spending some time out in those territories and learning about some of the origin stories. And deeply grateful that my daughter is growing up in such a beautiful place and learning stories at a much earlier age and in a much more authentic way than I had the opportunity to at her age. So this is the third of our Diversity, Inclusion, in Sport discussion series, which KidSport has graciously arranged to help build capacity, support, and awareness in our sport community. We believe that we have the opportunity to ensure that the clubs that our kids play in have an understanding of the diverse backgrounds of and experiences of where kids come from. And the session today is very much in the wheelhouse of what KidSport is here to support in terms of supporting low-income families. So we're going to dig into that topic today and have both a presentation for you and then an incredible panel to navigate through that conversation. I referenced earlier that this is supported by the Calgary Flames Foundation, and we've been so grateful for their support in order to be able to bring this to you today. As we go through the discussion today, you are very welcome to ask questions in the chat. We will, or in the Q&A, and we will work to bring those forward as we navigate the conversation. And I promised you a little bit more of an introduction on myself. So my name is Andrea Carey. I'm the Chief Inclusion Officer at Inclusion Incorporated. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. I identify as a white woman, cisgender woman, and I'm married with one child. I also identify as non-disabled, neurotypical, and a brain tumor survivor. And I come from a background of Irish and Welsh ancestry, which I'm also starting to dig in and learn a little bit more about. So today we're going to kick off our session by welcoming a really incredible human who's going to share with us about kind of where low-income families are at and some of the things they're navigating so that it can enrich our learning and our experience. So I'd really love to invite Annette Malin in. Annette has focused her career on supporting children and families with the intention of supporting the well-being and development of kids in our community. As a portfolio manager for children and youth with United Way of the Alberta Capital Region, she's passionate about building equity for children and youth and has been part of the All In for Youth initiative since its inception in 2016. She also facilitates relationships with schools and community agencies to support student-led poverty reduction projects with grant funding through the United Way's Make Your Mark initiative. Annette believes that by working together, we can create new opportunities to improve outcomes for children and youth so they can benefit from caring relationships, experience optimal development, and realize strong and hopeful futures. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it to Annette. At the completion of Annette's presentation, then we'll introduce the panel and we'll dive into kind of thinking about some ways we can navigate this in the sport system. So thanks so much, Annette.
Thanks, Andrea. I appreciate being here today. And I have to say, I'm quite excited to be able to connect with so many people who have joined us. So thank you for taking the time. What I'm going to be talking to you about today is going to be super oversimplified because when we talk about living in poverty, this is a very complex experience and it can be different for everyone. But in order to give you a bit of a highlight in terms of what that can be like, I'm going to go over some of the bigger issues that we'll typically hear and see when we're working with families in poverty. And I want to recognize this can be an uncomfortable topic for some people to talk about. It can be difficult, but it unfortunately is the reality for many children within our communities. And so, if this is triggering for you, I do hope and invite you to speak with someone about it. These can be very difficult personal conversations. And so please do make sure you reach out if there's anything that you hear or bothersome for you. And of course, at the end of the conversation, I'm also happy to be connected with if people would like to talk more. So my hope for today is that we all walk away from this session having learned something more about others and imagining ways in which we can better support all members of our community, and most specifically in this case, children and families. And so I'm going to use, I think in this forum, we might be able to use, actually, I'm not sure if we can use like hands up. Yes, we can. We can do hands up and applause. Using one of those emoticon kind of expressions, I would just like to invite our audience to indicate if you have ever lived in poverty for any period of your life. If you have, please click on one of those buttons so we can just get a sense of how many people within this forum perhaps have had that experience. Okay. And so, when we think about this, poverty is simple, but also a very difficult topic to understand. Most of us probably think about it as having a hard time paying bills or rent or having your phone cut off. And this is true, but it's also much more than that. It can be having difficulty concentrating because you haven't had a full meal for days. It might be unable to pay for that extras like your child's art programs or school field trips. It's working multiple jobs with little energy and time for your family's other needs. It's living with humiliation because you cannot provide the things that your children's peers have. And it's feeling like you don't belong. People experience poverty for a variety of reasons. It can be temporary or chronic. In chronic cases, we have people who are born into poverty. They might have had multi-generational experiences where their families have always lived in poverty. Often it's linked to things like limited education, hard to get enough income to pay your way out of that lifestyle. It can also be temporary, such as when you're a post-secondary student and you might have to rely on a food bank. If a member of your family or yourself has lost a job or had some kind of severe illness or a death in the family. And of course, it's fair to say temporary poverty can become long-term poverty as well. Now, it might shock you to understand this, but we have a lot of children living in poverty in Alberta. 1 in 6 are living in poverty in Alberta. I want you to think about that. When you think about the average classroom, we're talking about 4 to 6 students who consistently do not have what they need in terms of food, housing, clothing, healthcare, or other forms of stability. Poverty is also more likely to be experienced by single parent families, especially women and members of our BIPOC communities. And living in poverty can have a direct impact on students' current and their long-term well-being. Not having consistent food in your home or relying on low-cost food budget often means consuming foods that are higher in sugar and salt, which are associated with behavior changes in the short term, such as sugar crashes. But it also has an impact on their oral health, their blood pressure, and physical development. You can imagine it doesn't take long for those to have long-term impacts on our health and well-being. It's been said that poverty changes the way children's brains develop. It actually shrinks parts of the brain that are essential for memory, planning, and decision-making. When you think about that in your roles, what does that look like when a child shows up because they don't have that same capacity as a child who perhaps was not living in poverty? When we think about diet and lifestyle, sleep, stress, physical activity, they all impact our immediate well-being, including our mental health and long-term well-being. And I can think we can all relate. When we haven't had enough to eat, it's very easy to get grouchy. It's hard to focus. It's hard to really be present. And that definitely has an impact in terms of how that child engages with others in their environment. We even know that living with low income is actually correlated to lower life expectancy. So basically, the people who live in the more poor communities actually have a decreased life expectancy. So when they do the analysis and they look at the rate of poverty in a community, for every increase in poverty, it's related to 6 months less life for the adult male. So it has a direct impact on how long our people will live in those communities. I want to tell you a little bit right now in terms of what it can look like when I think about a friend of mine. She's lived in a low-income neighborhood for years. She's made the choice ever since her children were young that she wanted to raise her children in those communities. She built relationships with neighbors and dealt with issues that arose while living in the inner city. and she's lived there for 25 years. About a year ago, she had a conversation with her adult children and asking them, what was your experience like growing up in our neighborhood? A neighborhood that she and her children had all chosen to call home throughout that time. The response surprised her. They actually said they lived in fear. They were stressed about the crime in the neighborhood and what it might happen to them. They were worried sometimes coming home from school if there was something odd happening on the street. And I don't want you to be I don't want it to be, I don't know what it would like to be fearful of your environment. But I do know that many children face this sad reality. Whether it's fear that you have to leave your current home because mom can't cover the rent, it's fear from living in a war zone or refugee camp, or experiencing anxiety and depression, and knowing your parents cannot pay for mental health services. Those are all experiences that many of the kids that we work with experience, and has an impact on how they connect to them and themselves and their environment. And all of these children in these circumstances are experiencing high levels of stress. And when we're stressed, it's hard to respond logically, literally. Levels of stress actually across the world have increased during the pandemic. And I want to take a moment right now, even though we're talking about living in poverty, I want to show you a little bit of a demonstration about what stress does to our brains. And the reason is that even though we're all experiencing stress, and I hope that you can think about this in terms of any part of your life when you're experiencing someone who's having a moment or a difficult day, what we know is that when our kids are living in poverty, sometimes their levels of stress are higher. And so understanding what that looks like and how that shows up when someone's having a meltdown, when someone's having a hard time getting along and won't cooperate, when someone maybe is shut down entirely and not cooperating, not talking, what's going on? And when we know what's going on with kids or with adults, we're better able and positioned to respond in a way that's going to be helpful and to prepare for that in the future. So I want you to just take a moment and look at my hand. And we're going to pretend the hand is the brain, because this is a really important thing for us to understand. And so we have our brain stem, and we have the amygdala, and the amygdala really is the reptilian part of our brain. It's our oldest part of our brain. It's the part that gets activated when we are in fear or in stress or anxiety. It's the part that triggers the fight, flight, or freeze part of our behavior. And then, we have the more advanced part of our brain up front here. And of course, that's developed more recently after the reptilian brain, and that's the prefrontal cortex. And so this is our logic and our thinking and our executive function. It's all the components that allow us to be rational. And so what happens is that most of the time we can function like this. We can function with our cognitive abilities fully intact, and we can reason and we can give direction and we can respond. But sometimes when we get triggered, if something happens in our environment where we're stressed out enough, we literally flip our lid. And our reptilian brain, the amygdala, takes over. And that fight, flight, or freeze component is in charge. This part of logic is gone. And so what I want people to understand is that sometimes when you're working with kids and they're having a hard time cooperating, they're having a meltdown, they're maybe, like I said, shut down, what we want to understand is that child is stressed. That child is having a moment, and they literally cannot be logical and respond in a way they might when they're calm. And so our role as individuals in their lives, as caregivers, as coaches, as neighbors, as family members, our role is just to be with them in that moment until they calm down enough that their brain actually starts to respond in a way that you can cooperate and you can talk. And so I think that recognition is really important, because there's such a high level of stress that people are facing these days, especially our kids who have had additional worries placed upon them with social media, with the pandemic, with just trying to, function, knowing the level of stress that has increased in their parents' lives in the last few years. If we're able to understand that there are times when kids literally cannot control their emotions, and just understand that and give them time and be with them until such a moment where they're able to start to engage again and they're able to talk, that's going to go a really long way. And unfortunately, we know a lot of kids who don't have fully functioning brains will resort to this. It's not their fault. They're not choosing it. It's what their brain does to take over and keep them safe. It's what would have happened years ago when, a saber-toothed tiger might have appeared, that part of our brain takes over in order to help us run away from danger. So that's all that's happening for those kids, is that they are having a stress response. And our job is just to help them understand that they're safe until we can actually have a conversation with them again. So I know that feels a little bit off topic, but in terms of relating to kids and stress and the level of stress that comes in living with low income, it's important to be realized. So basically, if we can be calm, we can move forward with them, and we can also prepare them for when these kinds of things come up again, and hopefully eventually get to the point where we help them look at other ways of responding when they're having a hard moment. Maybe you choose that they're going to go sit against the wall and they're going to take some time until they're ready to re-engage with the group. Now, despite everything I've shared about the level of poverty that exists among children in Alberta, and the fact that I think we all are very cognizant of the rising costs of utilities and food and fuel and everything else, the news is not all bad. Children are actually very resilient, and their brains have plasticity, meaning it's adaptable to change. And so some of the ways we can create change is through what we provide to kids every week: play, physical literacy, and connection. These activities, coupled with mentoring from caring individuals such as yourselves, have proven valuable impact. If you don't believe me, look at NHL player Taylor Hall, who frequented the Boys and Girls Clubs as a child. Having those kinds of connections, even when you're living in poverty, make a difference in the short term and in the long term. So what can be done? When you think about your role as people who are supporting children's development, as neighbors, as community leaders, I want you to be aware of what children and families may be experiencing, and these challenges that you can be prepared to respond to. And some of the ways you might respond is looking at food. Can we have snacks available at activities? You would be amazed at how quickly kids can start to respond better when they're not hungry and distracted. Again, that's literally a body response, that when they're really hungry, their brains are not working properly. So sometimes a granola bar can be a lifesaver in those kinds of settings. I think we need to be aware of people are struggling with mental health right now, with a number of things: anxiety, depression, stress. And our kindness and our empathy can go a very long way. We want to encourage positive connections with peers and coaches, which is good for everyone's well-being. We can teach our kids relaxation and mindfulness techniques during our cool downs, so that they can start to have those strategies in the rest of their life to really calm themselves down and understand how to be in control of their bodies. And we can look for signs of stress and connect them to appropriate resources. So we don't need to know their whole story, but if we can identify that there's something that maybe is off, or the family's having a hard time, maybe we connect them to 211, where they can call and look for supports in their neighborhood for housing or food banks or mental health supports. We can look at addressing inequities. How can we look at the issues of racism and address social issues during play environments? How can we evaluate our programs, our communication with coaches, to be experienced for people who thinking about people who do not speak or read English, who do not have internet to register for sports, who may have inconsistent participation because getting the bus is difficult, or parents are working long schedules, multiple jobs, and getting their kids to activities is difficult. We can connect them to other community services and agencies. Who else is working with these families and in these communities? How can we come together to learn from each other? With training, maybe equity, diversity, and inclusion training, maybe understanding what are the barriers and needs that families have. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Alphonso Davies from Edmonton, soccer superstar. Even he missed practices when he was young because he had to babysit his siblings. His family ended up relying on other families to help get him to practices from time to time. And we know these things have big impacts, whether you become a superstar or not. Finally, my last recommendation to you would be, let's cut our kids a break. Families are doing the best that they can. If we can be kind and show empathy and to continue to encourage them to participate in whichever way they can, that makes a difference. That helps people to feel included, to feel valued, and that will make a huge difference in their lives. You just never know what kind of impact you are actually having on children and families. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my time. I'm at 15 minutes, and I will invite Andrea back on.
Super. Thanks so much for that, Annette. What a great way to kick us off and some of the things to think about. And I just really valued the messages around sort of empathy and kindness and considering all the pieces that families are dealing with right now. Every family, and if you layer on economic stresses, it would be incredibly difficult to navigate all of the things coming at us. And when we look at inflation and how rapidly that's going up, I mean, it's just startling to me every time I buy groceries, and I'm recognizing that that would be really difficult for families in different circumstances.
Yeah, what we know is that families who are doing relatively okay and getting by before the pandemic, many of them are not now. We have many more families living in poverty due to the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to pivot to our panel, but we're going to just kick off with a little video from KidSport first. So I'm going to have that play, and then we'll invite our other panelists up.
I'm Juliana, and I'm currently in grade 10, and I play a few sports.
What an awesome message to lead us into the rest of this discussion today. So I'm going to invite our other panelists up. So I'm going to begin by inviting Rebecca Fuschel-Luke up. And Rebecca is a social worker, a forensic social worker in the child welfare advocacy sector. And Rebecca provides support, education, and advocacy for parents impacted by the child welfare system. She is passionate about exploring how trauma-informed social justice and equitable approaches can transform the way we provide social services. She's the mom of 2. She loves food and she loves taking naps, and she's just a joy to spend some time with. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you today, Rebecca. Our other panelists today are Kevin Webster. Kevin is the CEO of KidSport Calgary and the Calgary Flames Sport Bank. He's been working for 8 years with low-income families to help them access sport. He's a husband, a dad of 2 young kids, coach, and active volunteer in the Calgary sports system. And Kevin has been instrumental in bringing together this discussion series. So welcome, Kevin. Great to have you here. And our next panelist is Dana Hyman. Dana has been on the KidSport team for 10 years. For the past 5 years, she's been the executive director with KidSport Edmonton. And previous to that, she was with the KidSport Calgary chapter as the manager of events and volunteers. She holds an education background in the social work field, as well as the event management field, and was drawn to KidSport's mission because of the impact that high school rugby had on her life. And again, has been hugely instrumental in making this discussion series come to life. So thank you, Dana, and welcome. And Annette, we've already introduced, so I'm not going to reintroduce you, Annette, because folks have met you already. But yeah, what an incredible panel. I'm so excited to hear from each of you today. So maybe Rebecca will lead with you. I'm going to ask a question about what do you think are some of the intersectionalities that we need to plan for when we're thinking about low-income families?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about, poverty and low-income families, it's important to think of a definition that is holistic, right? And multifaceted that, takes into consideration not only, the standard of living, so more of the income-based things, but also like social, community connections and just like structural systems. So how, an individual's different identities experience all these things. So you can have someone who is a refugee, and they are low income, but you're looking at, cultural, their culture, language barriers, and race, and all those things intersecting with the various systems in terms of how they experience poverty might be different from, someone who is, white and low income. But then maybe they're a family that's involved with children's services. So then there are all those also kind of legal implications and background that we need to think about in terms of how they're experiencing poverty, how they're able to have access to different things and education and sports and all that. So I think, yeah, that's really important to think about it from that holistic sense. And even if we're thinking about families, if their standard of living is low, so when you look at income, but then if their relationships, with their family, with coaches are rich and full, and in terms of barriers are reduced when they're accessing services, then the impact of living in poverty is reduced, right? Because it's holistic. It's not just about income, because sometimes we think just because someone is poor, right, their life is like horrible, and someone who has money, they have a more balanced mental health and well-being. So that's kind of my insight on that and things to consider.
Yeah, that's such a powerful way to think about it. And I loved sort of that asset shaping of like what else is going on for them that maybe is really supportive for them in that environment, and kind of trading off some of the other experiences they might be navigating. Thank you for that beautiful insight. Annette, I wondered if you wanted to weigh in on that question as well.
Yeah, I actually really like what Rebecca had to say. And as I mentioned when I started, I provide an oversimplification. In 15 minutes, you can't obviously get into it. And there is the economic poverty, but there is other forms of poverty. There's social poverty where people don't have connections. If you just move to a community and you don't have those supports, what do you do? For instance, today, my daughter called from school and she's sick. And there's no one there to take her home. So thank goodness I've got grandma at my disposal. Not everyone has grandma at their disposal to help out when needed. And so, there's many different types of poverty and there's many different types of deprivation that people face. But that's not the whole picture. And we have to remember we're talking about people, and there's, as Rebecca mentioned, there's many assets, there's many depth. There's so much depth to what our families experience and are. And so it's really always helpful to look at them in the context of the person and what their situation is. And if they need help, what kind of help do they need? How can we provide that?
Yeah, thank you for that additional context. Dana or Kevin, do you want to weigh in on this?
I think both commentary is very powerful. I think when Annette touched on in her lead presentation, 1 in 6 kids are living in poverty. The more we interact with kids sport families, we understand that they are from every walk of life, every portion of our community, every community in our city. So the more we can work together with all the sport clubs on this call to further understand and provide that empathy that's been referenced many times here to help families and help their kids feel comfortable and welcome, the more we can do in connecting those 1 in 6 kids to sport opportunities, because our chapters in Alberta are the most active kids sport chapters in the country. Calgary and Edmonton being the 2 largest, but we're not helping all the kids. There's lots more kids that aren't participating in sport for some of the reasons we'll touch on today, and others that they just haven't been connected or haven't felt comfortable doing so yet. So the more we can work together to find opportunities and welcome these families to sport, the more benefit those kids will have to be able to thrive and benefit and learn from all the positives that sport can provide.
I would say, to add on to what Kevin and everyone else has already said, another piece that Annette mentioned earlier today is 2-on-1. We don't have to have all the answers. All of this, as she was mentioning, it's overwhelming. There's a lot to it. There's so many different dimensions, variables, elements associated to this. And if there's anything that we can do with sharing the compassion and letting them know about 2-on-1 across Alberta, families can call and look for resources and provide resources. From what I understand, it's really a two-way street. If you have something to give, you call. If you have something that you need, you call. So I think that's a really great place to start. And as Rebecca was saying too, with all the different variables associated into each different family with what they could be going through, race, religion, newcomers, still that element of poverty. It's overwhelming, definitely. And I think approaching each family with that compassion piece is extremely important to keep in mind, especially I know when things are busy and we're all rushing and we've got to start at 3 because that's when the ice time starts. But I think keeping compassion first is always going to benefit the kids at the end of the day, even the ones not living in poverty, right? I think kids at the end of the day, they're all craving love, sense of belonging, community, and the coaches and mentors providing that. It's extremely important. So we're very grateful for the hats that everyone wears and provides that to our kids.
Awesome. As we kind of think on some of the challenges that families are facing, I want to stay kind of on that theme and talk about what are some of the barriers that you're seeing come up most frequently in working with low-income families. And I'm going to sort of two bars to it, one on the sports side, but I'm going to say to Annette and Rebecca, not necessarily a sport lens, but like, what are some of those things that we need to be paying attention to really support families in a meaningful way? So maybe Kevin and Dana will start on the sports side, and then we'll go to sort of more broadly.
Yeah, I think Kevin and I can this one on the sports side of things. And I think, and Kevin, I don't mean to speak for you on this. I believe we're on the same page, but please jump in. I know that one thing that we really wanted to share with everyone is that we are not professionals in this sector. We just know from 10 years each of us of experience in this community and hearing it from the other 38 chapters across Alberta, what they're experiencing with their sport clubs and with the kids that go to those sport clubs too. So everything Kevin and I are saying today is coming from a place of living and learning through working with our sport clubs in the past. So we just really wanted to highlight that's where Kevin and I are coming from. Did I miss anything on that note, Kevin?
Yep, you got it.
Okay. I would say to really kick off that piece then, one of the barriers that we're hearing about is only having online registration available. So, is there an opportunity for paper applications for someone to come in? I know now that COVID is hopefully, fingers crossed, exiting our communities, is there more opportunity for some in-person registration opportunities versus that technology piece and being online? Not all families have access to that. And in the same breath, credit cards. Not all of our families have access to credit cards. So is there another way, instead of paying up front a few $100s in order to get their kid registered, is there another opportunity that we could be providing our families with? What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I think we can use a reference here. The biggest sport club is a soccer club here in Calgary that we fund significantly more kids than any other program, and that's because their registrar and staff kind of walk hand in hand with families through the process, make sure they have the paperwork or know how to find the paperwork to apply. They'll send us, 30 to 50 applications all in one folder. We know the applications are well put together because their staff are educated on our process and they're volunteers and can help a family make sure when it is submitted in a paper form that they're in a good step to move forward. So, just yesterday they sent 35 applications in. 9 times out of 10, those are all going to be approved applications. So they're, a couple hundred kids a year we're putting into their soccer programs because of the work they're doing in their community and educating families on how the support can help them and how easy they're trying to make that registration process connect with families and make it welcoming for them. So it's not a challenge for them to ask for that help. They are supported through the process, and that's a great one we use here to kind of share with clubs on how we can work together to make the process a little bit simpler for families.
I love that, Kevin. And oh, sorry, Andrea, you unmuted. Did you want to say something?
Go ahead, keep going.
Kev, I could talk about this all day. Another piece that I would say as well is once they are signed up, sometimes 8 months is a long commitment to a family in poverty and not in poverty again. So is there a way that we can make sport programs shorter, 3 months? This might provide the family with an opportunity to ensure transportation is available for those 3 months, ensure X amount of dollars is available for those 3 months. And once they're registered and they're 4 years old, is matching ballerina shoes extremely important for that child to have, or can they just wear anything that they can get on their feet so they can get into that dance class and get on that stage and get to dancing? So there's some other opportunities we think within once they are registered, how to get them engaged, keep them engaged for the amount of time that's more appropriate for the families that do live within poverty.
Yeah, I think, a lot of that's specific to sport and some of it's historical. I know, with my own personal journey with my kids now participating in sport that fundraisers need to have matching hoodies and be on road trips and extra coaching. all those things are great for my kids. I'm privileged to be able to support those teams in doing that. But when we consider those families that we're assisting, does that continue to make them feel welcome, and how are they able to support, especially when we look at, what Rebecca and Annette have mentioned with different working schedules, potentially shift work, no access to computers at work. And if they're fortunate to work, then how do we make sure that we're not pushing them further away and making it tougher for them to make sure their kids can continue to feel part of those activities and sports?
That was well said.
All right. Well, let's take that question back to Annette and Rebecca and check in with them both from if they have context in sport, but also beyond that, just kind of considering what are some of those barriers. And Annette, I know you mentioned some in your opening as well, but how do we start to think about those and be really intentional about navigating them with families?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I really like hearing what Kevin and Dana were talking about. The idea that you might have intermediaries or other trusted sources that can support registration, I think, is really important. We all want the best for our kids. That's what it comes down to. And so sometimes that means getting help to make that happen. And so when we think about the Ukrainian refugees that are coming, or the Afghanistan or the Syrian, there's been so many who come who aren't familiar with our processes, may not know the language. So having a system in place where someone can help walk them through that application is really helpful. I think, Dana mentioned a couple of things, and other things that come to mind is, well, what if they can't pay the money up front? Can they volunteer and cover some of that cost? Can they make payments? What is the system in place in order to really help them to identify if they can't pay at all? Is there a process in place if their child wants to participate but they don't have the income? Can someone help them look at Canadian Tire Jumpstart or Sports Central if they need equipment or whatever? And so, I think especially when you're new to a community or you don't have a lot of capacity, are there volunteers that can be called upon to support those kinds of families through that process? So really thinking through what are some of the other solutions other than the standard ways we've done business. And I think that kind of reflects a little bit back to what Rebecca was talking about earlier as well. The other things I'd say in terms of barriers, and to really think about beyond the actual sports component, we know across all income levels, the level of stress kids are facing is unbelievable right now. And so we see very affluent schools that are talking about the degrees of stress that kids are facing, how difficult it is for them to respond. So I think if we can think about, are there ways we can address food and mental health support? And again, you don't have to have the answers. You don't have to be a counselor, but just be kind and empathetic. Understand they're going to have an off day. Understand if they don't come for 3 weeks. And then when they come back, rather than saying, where have you been? Maybe you just say, I'm so glad to see you again. Welcome back. Right? Those kinds of messages really convey value of that child, that they're important, they're included, they matter. So those kinds of, messages and responses that we can provide to kids, that we've got their back, right? If they're hungry, we got a granola bar for you, no problem, right? You're having a moment, no problem. Take 10 minutes, right? Go for a walk, right? Maybe so-and-so, maybe this other kid's going to go with them and they're just going to go for a walk for a little bit. And then when they come back, they're going to be ready to participate because they cooled down, right? So look for different kinds of small strategies that you can offer to be responsive to what's going on in front of you. Rebecca, did you have anything you'd want to add?
Yeah, lots of really great points from everyone, and a few things stood out. So firstly, just in overall, I think, being really conscious of how flexible you can be with your processes and policies. So really liked how Dana mentioned, a family being able to commit to 8 months might not be something that's doable. And I think all the time when we're talking about systems and policies, they're created by people. It's like they're socially constructed, so they can be changed, right? And often systems and policies are made from the lens of the most privileged in our society, right? And so if you have room in your policies to have that flexibility on, sometimes I know it's okay, our registration date hardline the 31st or this, or with payments, it's how can we work as an organization to accommodate folks that are, at the margins, and and everything like that, because that's, it reduces those barriers, because oftentimes policies create barriers, right? So you have to think from that lens. And then another point that Dana mentioned about ballet, because obviously, with my daughter, she did ballet, but things like hair, right? When you kind of think about what the clothes are, or how your hair should look, not everyone's hair can go up in a ponytail, right? So again, those are things, or buying certain things, buying certain clothes. What are maybe some sponsorships? Can a family be sponsored, right, for some of those sports that are more expensive? And then another thing, I think, in terms of barriers, is with certain communities may not know that certain sports are available, right? So there's a lack of knowledge and understanding. So what are ways that clubs can kind of collaborate or make connections with those like community organizations within certain neighborhoods to kind of say, hey, this is what our sport is about. And that again reduces some of those barriers. They can help with communicating with the registration process for families, and then more people from diverse groups and incomes being involved and having access to sports that are maybe not just soccer, right? So yeah.
Thanks so much for that, Rebecca. I really loved your point around that so much of what we're navigating is often socially constructed and created by those with the most privilege, because that really is such a powerful way that we need to start to look at where we're at today and where we actually want to go, and how do we think differently, pull those pieces apart, build them back with or by the groups that we want at the table and part of our programs. So Rebecca, I want to stay on you for a moment. I feel like one of the themes that's sort of been coming up quite a bit is around trauma-informed practice and trauma-informed care. And I know that's such a big area for you. So I want to put you a little bit on the spot and just see if you can comment on a couple of things that might be supportive for this audience to think about in that space.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about that trauma-informed approaches and integrating it into programming, it's really about like that empowerment, transparency, safety, right? Because when you're thinking about, families that are living in poverty or stress and all the things that are happening into this world, what space are they coming into, right? When they're coming into, it's not just sports, right? Like, it's not just like, okay, this utopia now that they're in the sports club and it's removed from everything happening in the world. So I think having that trauma-informed, context is being like, what environment are we creating for children when they're coming? And so I really like some of the things that even Annette was saying, like, do they just need like a granola bar? Like, what do they need? And what, as a coach or as a club, what environment of safety are we offering? Because they may be experiencing all these things outside in the world. And then if they, let's say someone is, a newcomer and, they're also racialized, and then they're experiencing microaggressions in your sports club, right? And they don't feel safe and they don't have that trust. And so that is traumatization that's happening, right? And when you look at that, the structural systems, as we're saying, in terms of all the multifaceted ways. So I think it's just something simple like that, and really thinking about what are the needs of like this family, what are the needs of this child, and not making assumptions, and really just like asking, like, what do you need? What do you need today? Because you don't know what they went through to even just show up, or even the parent, for them to get their kid to sports. And for some parents, it's like, I need a break. So this is, even for me, like, they have dance and it's unparented. That's that 1 hour that parents, really have. So again, that trauma informed is like, everyone has strengths, no matter what their situation is. There are different ways that they're resisting, and that they, how can we empower folks and help them, not in a sense of like, I know better, but like, what you need. How can I then help you to kind of like facilitate that?
Yeah, thanks so much for that. So as we kind of think about how people are showing up and what they need to be successful, I want to think a little bit about like how what are some of those areas we might need to navigate to really support kids from low-income families? So if they're showing up with lower skills, or they're showing up without the equipment or apparel, or they're food insecure, what are some of those pieces that we can kind of tangibly suggest putting in place, or that sport leaders need to plan for to support them? So maybe, Annette, can I begin with you? You've given us a few little tips already today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's many things that can be done. I mean, we've mentioned 211. 211 is available across Alberta. You can phone, you can go online. And so there's many ways to reach them. So, as Rebecca said, ask. I mean, I think often we hold back. We're scared about assuming or about offending or anything like that. I think for the most part, in my experience, when people see you have good intent and you're trying to help, a lot of that fades away. And so, if they see you're just trying to help, often they'll be receptive to having that conversation. And if it's something that you don't have direct control over within your club or within your program, recommend they make that call to 211, that they have lots of different resources that can help families in need. And so that's definitely one thing. Look within your own program. If it means every week you have a box of granola bars and it costs you $12, then maybe that's the solution that can have a big impact. Because again, one child misbehaving, as we know, can have a very quick ripple effect. And so if we can kind of look at those kinds of things, what's poking up right away, what are things that we can resolve, those are good things. And have conversations with each other. Talk to other clubs about what are you doing? How are you managing this? A lot of people have found solutions and strategies. And so this is not about reinventing the wheel. It's about finding what works and applying it for yourselves. And then to Rebecca's point earlier, I would look at that application form and pull it apart and look at what do we really need to know? What do we really need from our families in order to run this programming and keep this child safe? And so those kinds of things of really trying to be conscious about not just doing things because this is the way we've always done things, but pulling apart your application, pulling apart your program, and looking at, what are ways we can be flexible? What are ways we can do things differently? How do we pilot new ideas in order to explore how we can be more receptive, effective, supportive in this environment? So I'll kind of end it with that and see if anyone else wants to jump in.
I have a quick add. I love everything you say, Annette, and I'm all about working smart and not working hard, right? And I think an easy way is partnerships, right, with sports clubs. So even when you talk about food insecurity, food bank, housing stuff, mental health, a really easy way is with the clubs, reach out. There are so many different organizations out there that provide all these things. So literally it's calling their community outreach and saying, hey, we're a sports club. We have, diverse families. How can we have a partnership so that, because, I think 211 is really great, but that might not work for everyone, right? In terms of being on the phone and calling and things like that. So if there's already a social service or an organization in the community that provides all these different services and wellness and stuff, then it's easy as a sports club to have that collaboration and partnership that you can send, families there and direct them there where that trust and relationship has already been built. And then it's again, less work, but also more meaningful and intentional. And there are different ways then that can be that multifaceted, wraparound support throughout the year and different ways of having that. So, yeah.
That was great, Rebecca. I loved that, and of partnerships. So I just want to check in with Dana and Kevin. Do you want to add anything to this one?
Of course. Start and I can fill in, or?
I think one thing Dana and I talked about before, and I connected with Brad from Jumpstart this morning too, just to kind of pick his brain on some of the thoughts, but it's just general promotion of our programs. We're fortunate in this province to have very active kids sport family, Jumpstart, as well as 2 sport banks in Sports Central in Northern Alberta and the Calgary Flames Sports Bank here in Southern Alberta. The more we can do with all the sport clubs on today, your organizations, all the sport clubs that'll be hopefully tuning into this as we share the video. The more we can make awareness for families, the more we can connect with parts of the community, as Rebecca and Annette have touched on, that maybe sport isn't connecting with today, if through community center relationships or through some of the many agencies that we work with that are also helping low-income families with many other facets of life, that we can make sport more accessible and help your clubs gain new members, as well as help families just in general find those spaces where their kids can thrive. And that touched on the stress that kids are going through in the last couple of years have been extremely difficult on all kids, not just those that have missed out on sports, but the ones that are involved in arts or creative activities or music, and their interactions at school have been much different. So sports is one of those many outlets that can provide them that family, not only for the kids, but the impact sport has on the parents in terms of connecting them with the community is very powerful. And sport in general is a very welcoming and strong, creative family space for people. And the more people we can give that opportunity to feel part of that, the better.
Totally agree with that. And I'd also add into that, really to what everyone has said, that general awareness piece in the kids sport program, ensuring that your registrar and coaches and support staff and volunteers, board of directors know about the kids sport application program, Jump Starts. If the Y has a program, whatever else might be out there, any other opportunities, know how to use what's available. You can always call Kids Sport. I'll speak on behalf of Kids Sport because I can't on behalf of Jumpstart or any of the other organizations, but we're more than happy to walk you through, you and your group, invite us to a board meeting, whatever it might be, walk you through the application. It's an easy to use program. That's why we've created it. We don't want to create barriers. We want to create an easy access point to sport for our families. So kids information, parents information, sport club information, financial information. That's it, really. So we can walk you through that, how to fill it out, how to submit it. And also just general promotion. If you follow us on social media, if you don't, then maybe that's a place to start following us on social media. That would be wonderful. Thank you. And sharing our information, whether it's in your e-newsletters or whatever it might be, because it's bigger than us, right? It's bigger than this conversation. And if we can get kids into your clubs, great. Let's get them in there through your e-newsletter. But you never know who's going to receive your e-newsletter who knows someone on the other side of the nation, right? In Ontario, who could get a kid into kids sport programs there as well. So if we can, as a collective, come together and ensure everybody in Canada knows about kids sport and the other supporting programs associated to it, the better our future is going to be, because our kids are going to have what they need to grow into well-rounded adults and citizens for the community. So it's going to take a real team to ensure that our kids have what they need. And I'm looking at a bunch of beauties on the screen and a bunch of folks too in the seats here today. So really grateful for everyone joining us today and getting the chance to talk about kids sport and how we can make our families feel more included in your sport clubs here and around Canada.
Yeah, I think that's such powerful points. And on our resource page out of today, there's links to both Kids Sport, Jumpstart, the 211 number that we've referenced several times throughout today. So just trying to provide you some next steps as an audience to go and dig into a little bit. We had a question in the Q&A that I think ties nicely to the thread we've been on, which is when qualifying for subsidy programs, are family dynamics considered? For example, almost any family with a child with a disability may make a decent salary, but the cost of life is way higher. And I think this kind of connects as well to the point I brought up earlier around inflation and how quickly that's been changing for families, whether it be gas prices or groceries or all of the things that have rapidly shifted how families are able to navigate their economic circumstances. So I would love to flip this, maybe start with Kevin and Dana, just thinking about sort of how this shows up in the kids sport side, and then have Rebecca and Annette layer on from there.
Yeah, I think, and I can speak for our chapter, but I also think it's priority across the province. We use the federal government's low income cutoffs, LICO, as our baseline in determining who would receive kids sport support. Our board looks at that every year, and we add a buffer on based on cost of living in Calgary and area. And then we look at every application independently. It's not a black and white. We don't have automated intelligence deciding who gets approval or who not. So our staff are on the phone or email with families all day long, all week long. Right now we're processing on a weekly basis probably 150 applications. Some of those don't take any interaction, but a lot of them take multiple interactions, whether there's a language barrier, an understanding needed on what income information is required, a connection with the sport that they're interested in, and then walking them through the program. So, the last few years, unfortunately, even pre-COVID, we faced a lot of different challenges in our community with an economic downturn, a lot of people out of work, the impacts of COVID that had on people and employment, and then missing opportunities with sport not being open or limited opportunities available. So although we weren't helping as many kids, we have been interacting with families at a greater rate in ensuring that we understand their whole picture in making an assessment based on their qualification for kids sport for support. So a child with disability, someone that was employed up until December but hasn't worked this year, their notice of assessment from 2021 would look significantly different than their real life status today. So we take all that into consideration and really try and understand where the family's at today, and if there's a place that kids sport can help. In Calgary, we've increased our funding this year to try and motivate and further support families in getting back to sport. But all our chapters in the province are community funded. So we're raising money every day to make sure that if there's another family that shows up tomorrow, that there's resources there to help them.
That's right. The hustle is every day. Every day, every dollar counts for our kids, for sure. And really everything Kevin said equates it to Kids Sport Edmonton as well. We do our due diligence with each Kids Sport application. And if a family is reaching out to us saying, our notice of assessment doesn't really match up with our current status, and we've got a kid with disability, we want to get into parasport, we also take letters of endorsement. So if there's a principal at their school or social worker that they're working with saying we believe little Billy would benefit from sledge hockey, participating in sledge hockey, that's something that we would take into consideration and go from there as well too. So I would really just add that on to what Kevin said.
Super. Rebecca, do you want to add into this?
No, I feel like everyone has been saying such great things, and I'm always like repeating. I'm like, I have to be intentional when I make my comments. So I'm like, yeah, no, that was great information. I'm also learning things too as a parent of a kid accessing sports.
Right? Yeah, it's a constant learning journey. Has been my learning.
Yes, it is.
Annette, how about you?
I would take it back, and same as Rebecca. Like, I'm like, oh, what can I add now? Like, my immediate reaction is going back to what Rebecca talked in the beginning. We have a lot of policy and process in our work that was put in for good reason at a certain point in time. But at the end of the day, part of me is like, are we putting too many things in the way? Like, if kids want to play sports, and what do we need to do to make that happen? Like, how do we, if we're not sure, like, how do we support someone with a disability? Let's ask the parents. Like, they will help us understand what we need to do as coaches, what we need to do in the program to be able to facilitate that. And so, really, like, let's get some of these things out of our way so that we can just do what we all want to do, is, provide the best environments for these kids. So I would just encourage us and challenge each other to look at, like, how can we simplify this and ultimately get more kids involved, because we know it's good for their physical health, their mental health, their leadership skills, like socialization, so many things. Let's just figure out how we make it happen.
Ooh, that's such a great line. We have another question in the Q&A. Does Kids Sport support high level or rep sports? So if a child is good enough to play AAA hockey, a few $100s versus a few $1,000s. So Kevin or Dana, I will let you jump into that one.
Yeah, we support all sports as long as there's a instructional component. We support kids in all sports. That includes competitive, recreational, learn to play, initiation, you name it. I know hockey was referenced specifically as many times it's considered as the most expensive, but we see many sports that dwarf hockey in terms of cost. Our funding, here locally, we're at $500 this year. Definitely we wouldn't pay for all of it, but there are other avenues. And if someone uses up our funding here, we would ask them to go to Jumpstart and apply for additional supports there. Sometimes their sport specifically might have supports. When we look at hockey, Hockey Canada has a program in this province. We're fortunate in Northern Alberta. The Oilers just launched a new program where low-income families will be able to play hockey for free.
You're stealing my thunder, Kevin.
Which includes equipment and fees. We've had the Flames Even Strength program here for a couple decades, which funds at a higher level. And then we have the equipment side, which makes that sport, ringette, lacrosse, more accessible when there's a lot of equipment included.
Yeah, definitely. We fund anything from community to club to elite, whatever it might be. We'll be funding that as long as it fits within our definition of sport, which, as Kevin mentioned, there's competition, start and end date, and a few other pieces there as well. Level to us is irrelevant. The kid plays what the kid wants to play, and we'll fund that as long as they financially qualify or having that endorsement letter that I was speaking about earlier. In Edmonton, we do $250, although I always tell Kevin that we're coming for him. We're coming for Kid Sport Calgary. We're going to match him and beat him one day. And he also mentioned that Northern Alberta has so for hockey specific, will fully fund the registration fee, elite or rep, whatever it might be for hockey. And then we also partner with Sports Central in Edmonton and Northern Alberta for hockey equipment. In addition to, there's 8 other sports that they support. So while you're filling out the Kids Sport application, if you need soccer cleats, you check the box. And once you're approved at Kids Sport, you're pre-approved to access Sports Central equipment. So, and I believe that's how it works in Calgary too with their equipment bank. So we have that option available as well.
Amazing. So yeah, both of you gave some great resources. So I'm going to encourage the audience to reach out to either of you if they've got direct questions. But as I said, we'll also be posting some of these resources on the website for this speaker series. And we have kind of one last question, then we're going to flip out to our table discussion shortly. So the question came in the chat. How/what should it look like when we provide the supports to help participants, snacks, time and space, while keeping programs running and the quality experience being quality physical activity? Oh, the sport experience being quality physical activity. So I'm just going to open it to our panel and see who would like to take this question, because I feel like each of you have spoken to it in different ways as we've navigated through.
I'm going to jump on this because I feel like the experts here are going to have better answers, and I want to go first. So I have something different to share. I feel like it's a great question, and it's one that you need to take very seriously. And so to this, I would take the approach of what you do in improv. You say yes, and you don't get to say no. So when you have these kinds of wicked questions, you're like, okay, how do I say yes, that we can have quality experience programming and we can address some of the barriers? So perhaps it is, we actually start programming 15 minutes early. So we're going to have our snack and our debrief, and we're just going to touch base with everyone, see how their day was. And then, when we get ice time or field time or whatever it is, that's when we're actually going to start the physical component of it. So could we extend the actual programming time to include some of the pieces that have become barriers and make sure that we're getting kids in a place where they're really engaged? So I would just challenge groups to figure out what are different ways we can offer this in a new format, or tweak what we have going in order to make sure we're, justifying both experiences that we want to create.
I'm going to jump in as well. I'm going to jump. Sorry, Dana. I'm going to jump in quickly as well too, and even to challenge to say, when you're saying, quality physical activity, from which perspective and what lens and definition, right? Of kind of, most of, as I say, like, our systems are built from a certain lens. And when you say quality, does it necessarily mean like, all right, you're doing, it's just physical activity, people like working as hard as they can and exerting their bodies, and like that was a quality, like 1 hour of like programming, right? So even building on what Annette said, like how can you can always tweak and be flexible based on the needs of your children that are attending the club. And it might look a little bit different for everyone, but kind of maybe just thinking outside the box of when you say quality, what are we meaning by that, and based on who? Is it the kids? Is it what, and keep that in mind.
I love that. I think, go ahead, Annette.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on to one thing because I felt like I didn't explain it as well, but Rebecca reminded me of it. I've seen groups, especially since COVID and with virtual formatting, they've done this new technique that I think is brilliant. And it's like a 5-minute check-in amongst the whole group. And so it's either, having people say a word or having people say an emotion or something that they're experiencing, because this is how I'm feeling in this moment. This is how my day has been, something like that. It's very simple, but it also gives the coach cues as to, okay, so-and-so's tired. Maybe I'm not going to expect the same level from them today. So as someone who's trying to facilitate that experience, you can take that 5 minutes and get great insight in terms of what you can, what you're going to see on the field, and maybe why you have kids participating or performing at different levels. And so I wanted to offer that as well. Back to you, Dana. Sorry.
No, those are both great insights, and I love that. And I love questioning, how do we define the quality and whose perspective lens is that coming from? I remember in school, I had a teacher that had a food drawer in her room. And, it's kind of just the honor system. Like you go take what you need, and it was always filled. And now that's sparking some other ideas. I know there's some community libraries that's just literally on someone's front lawn, and it's a little mini house, and you put a book in, you take a book out. And so maybe it's not even the sport club buying the granola bars. Maybe it's saying to the parents, like, hey, if you sit in a life of privilege and you want to, contribute to this food bin, that's our own sport club's area for kids to go to when they need a snack. Like, let's do that. And then the kids can go in and take what they need. And maybe you have a note that just says, like, take what you need. And I mean, you might see some kids take 12 granola bars, and it might be because that's what they need. So just kind of keeping that in mind, but and then maybe connecting with them and touching base to just check in and see if everything's okay, and where that's coming from. And the kids in your club, if there's some kids that are just going in there because their mom packed them a granola bar anyways, and they still just want more snacks, and that's another conversation episode, is something to keep an eye on. But that could be a way, is just having a snack community drawer, and having kids come 5 minutes early or so and take what they need, and scarf that down and get on the field. So that could be another opportunity, or take it home with them as well.
I'll just add it. I think, when we started discussing this series of diversity inclusion, we were introduced to Andrea, and it was this topic today that really kind of got us started on it, on how do we use the knowledge we have of interacting with families on a daily basis to help the sport community. And as we looked at the other topics, each and every one of them is very important, critical to growing sport and making it more welcoming, but it's a big hill to climb. And as volunteer run organizations, in most cases, just getting your sport clubs back up and running is a challenge coming out of the pandemic. So there's not one solution. I think maybe it was Ryan and Ness in our last session that just said, we just have to start somewhere, and gaining some of the knowledge and using the resources that are out there in the community, and just doing little steps, or helping your coaches understand, a little bit of what kids are going through, to start somewhere, I think is all we can do right now. I think everyone's all in this for the right reasons. And if we can take little steps to make all our programs a little more welcoming, and we look at that as kids sport as a challenge as well. How do we, interact more empathetically with every phone call we get and every email we have, to try and understand their situation and make their, for some cases, their first opportunity interacting with us and a sport club rewarding, and something that they don't feel as if they were made to feel like a burden and not wanting to come back to ask for help the next time. So we're learning, we're trying to build stronger relationships with our sport community. And I think, there's a lot that can be done, but just starting somewhere and knowing that if we can get one more child into your program, what you're all doing and offering sport can be life-changing for that kid. So it's an opportunity we don't want to miss in making that connection for that child.
Wow, what powerful answers to that question. So thank you to the audience for posing questions today. And I just wanted to kind of tie that last piece together a little bit too, and give you an example of a program that I'm involved in here in Victoria that we're running through Kids Sport in Victoria. And it's for low-income families who have qualified for Kids Sport funding. But part of our registration process, to Dana, one of the examples Dana gives, is to ask about what other things do they need to be supported. Are their equipment needs, or their food needs, or their transportation needs, and just really trying to meet those families with what's going to be supportive for them, for that child to show up each day. And then to tie to one of the comments Annette made as well, like kind of restructuring how that program's set up. So we spend the first 30 minutes when they come connecting, playing, asking how they are, just kind of that check-in and setting the tone for the session. And then they actually go into the multi-sport activity, whatever's planned for that session for the remaining hour. So we've very intentionally tried to create the space where it's about equity, it's about what they need to be there, and a space for them to show up in whatever ways will be supportive for them. So that's my little add-on to that question. So I want to just really thank each of our panelists. You've been incredible and shared such beautiful insights from your experience and your work in these spaces, and appreciating Kevin's advice as well around just starting small and picking something that will be supportive to move this work forward. And knowing that we're not going to solve everything in one day, but we're trying to figure out sort of what we can do to help navigate and support families from low-income circumstances to have access to sport in a good way. So thank you to Annette, to Rebecca, to Dana, to Kevin, so much for being here. And I want to encourage our audience. We're going to move, I'm just going to share the next presentation with you, which is coming up on June 8th. The next session in our speaker or discussion series is on Indigenous sport inclusion. And we will have the Indigenous Sport Council of Alberta in attendance, as well as Beth Hudson, who is an Indigenous woman from who grew up in Alberta and now lives in Northwest Territories and does a lot of work in sport and physical activity. And so that session will be coming up, and you can register for it via the link that Dean's just posted in the chat. And we'll look forward to seeing you then. And now we're going to navigate out to our tables. And there's a few different topic areas that are up for you if you want to dig into those topics in those discussion tables, or just use the time to network and get to know some other folks that are in the room today. And some of our panelists will pop around a little bit and the room's open for a little while. So just enjoy the time and space to connect with each other. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here.